Most people imagine the time of Jesus as distant and simple, a quiet land of sand and sandals, a world untouched by complexity. But the first century was not primitive. It was tense, crowded, politically charged, and spiritually restless. It was a world layered with empire, expectation, poverty, ambition, ritual, and fear. To understand the life of Jesus, you have to understand the atmosphere he stepped into. Because he did not enter a vacuum, he entered a system already straining under its own weight. The Roman Empire ruled the known world with disciplined efficiency. Roads cut through continents. Soldiers enforced order. Taxes flowed steadily toward Caesar. Rome did not merely conquer territories. It absorbed them. It allowed local customs to survive as long as loyalty remained intact. In Judea, this meant that Jewish religious life continued, but under watchful Roman supervision. Power rested in foreign hands. Authority wore armor. Jerusalem stood at the center of this tension. It was not the largest city in the empire, but it carried enormous symbolic weight. For Jews, it was the heart of covenant and promise. The temple dominated its skyline, white stone reflecting sunlight, visible from miles away. Pilgrims traveled for days to reach it. Sacrifices were offered daily. Priests managed rituals with precision. The temple was not simply a building, it was identity. Yet even here, Rome's presence lingered. A fortress overlooked the temple complex, housing Roman troops ready to intervene at the first sign of unrest. Festivals brought risk. Passover especially carried political undertones. It commemorated liberation from Egypt, a story of divine deliverance from imperial oppression. Celebrating freedom under Roman occupation was delicate. Crowds gathered. National memory stirred. Soldiers remained alert. Economically, life was uneven. A small elite controlled wealth. Land ownership concentrated in the hands of powerful families. Many peasants worked fields they did not own. Fishing villages lined the Sea of Galilee. Farmers depended on rainfall and harvest cycles. Artisans shaped wood and stone in small workshops. Taxes came from multiple directions. Roman tribute, temple obligations, local levies. For many, survival required constant labor. Poverty was visible. Beggars sat near gates. Disease carried social stigma. Leprosy meant exclusion. Blindness often meant dependence. Without modern medicine, minor injuries could become fatal. Life expectancy was short. Child mortality was common. Suffering was not hidden behind institutions. It lived on streets and in homes. And yet, alongside hardship, there was intense religious devotion. The Jewish people were not spiritually indifferent. They carried centuries of scripture, prophecy, and expectation. The Torah shaped daily practice. Sabbath regulated rhythm. Dietary laws distinguished identity. Prayer structured time. Faith was not abstract belief. It governed movement, speech, diet, commerce, and community. But even within Judaism, there was division. Different groups interpreted law and hope differently. The Pharisees emphasized strict adherence to the law and oral traditions. They believed righteousness required disciplined obedience in everyday life. The Sadducees, often associated with priestly elites, controlled temple operations and maintained pragmatic cooperation with Rome. The Essenes withdrew into communities, seeking purity apart from what they saw as corruption. Zealots rejected Roman authority outright, advocating resistance. These were not mild disagreements. They represented competing visions of how God's promises would unfold. Should liberation come through holiness? Through political revolt? Through patient endurance? Through separation? The people debated, argued, anticipated. Beneath daily routine, a question simmered. When would God act? Prophetic silence had lasted centuries. No recognized prophet had arisen like Isaiah or Jeremiah. Yet hope had not faded. Many believed the Messiah would come, an anointed king in the line of David who would restore Israel's glory. Expectations varied. Some imagined a warrior overthrowing Rome. Others anticipated a priest purifying worship. Still, others expected cosmic intervention. Into this environment, Jesus was born not in Jerusalem's power corridors, but in a small town under Roman census order. Even his birth narrative intersects with empire. Registration required travel. Bureaucracy dictated movement. The world was governed by decrees issued from distant capitals. Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, was obscure. It lay in Galilee, a region sometimes viewed with suspicion by Judean elites. Galilee was culturally mixed. Trade routes passed nearby. Greek language circulated alongside Aramaic. Roman cities like Sepphoris stood within walking distance of rural villages. The world was not isolated, it was interconnected. Language itself reflected this layering. Aramaic was the common spoken tongue among Jews. Hebrew was used in scripture and synagogue reading. Greek functioned as the broader language of commerce and administration across the Eastern Empire. Latin represented Roman authority. The first century was multilingual. Ideas moved across boundaries. Education varied. Formal literacy was limited, but oral tradition was strong. Scripture was memorized and recited. Stories carried theology. Public teaching took place in synagogues. Rabbis gathered disciples who followed closely, learning not only words but patterns of living. Teaching was interactive, dialogical, often delivered through parable. Honor and shame structured society. Reputation mattered. Family lineage carried weight. Public actions reflected on entire households. Women's roles were largely domestic, though they contributed significantly to economic life. Patriarchal norms governed inheritance and authority. Yet within this framework, relationships were complex and layered. Slavery existed throughout the Roman world. Enslaved people performed labor in homes, fields, and cities. Some could earn or purchase freedom. Others remained bound for life. The empire depended on hierarchy. Citizenship conferred privilege. Most inhabitants of Judea were not Roman citizens. Legal rights differed accordingly. Violence was a constant undercurrent. Crucifixion served as public warning. Rebels and criminals were executed visibly, bodies displayed as deterrent. Rome perfected intimidation. Peace existed, but it was maintained through force. The so-called Pax Romana was stability secured by threat. Travel, however, was relatively accessible because of Roman roads. Traders, soldiers, pilgrims, and teachers moved between towns. News spread by word of mouth. Rumors traveled quickly. A healer in one village would soon be discussed in another. Crowds could gather rapidly around someone perceived as extraordinary. Spiritual life extended beyond Judaism. The Roman world was religiously pluralistic. Pagan temples dotted cities. Gods of fertility, war, sea, and harvest were honored with sacrifice. Emperor worship reinforced loyalty. Mystery religions offered secret rites, promising personal salvation. Spiritual hunger was not confined to one tradition. To see the world during the time of Jesus is to see a society layered with empire and expectation, hardship and devotion, division and longing. It was not static, it was alive with movement and tension. Every action occurred within networks of meaning shaped by scripture, politics, family, and survival. The first century was not waiting idly. It was straining toward resolution. And when a teacher from Galilee began speaking of a kingdom not built on swords, but on transformation, he did so in a world already asking whether change was possible. Understanding that world clarifies the impact. Because his words did not float above history, they entered roads patrolled by soldiers, markets strained by taxes, temples guarded by tradition, and hearts divided between fear and hope. The world looked ordinary and volatile at once. It carried Rome's stamp and Israel's memory. It bore scars of conquest and echoes of promise. And in that layered landscape, amidst dust and decree, devotion and doubt, a message emerged that would move far beyond its origin. Not because the world was simple, but because it was ready.